Hello, class. You've had the opportunity to look at the various methods and events that took place for African Americans to get equal rights. Today, we're going to be focusing on the leaders, especially on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., this violence versus nonviolent method. Martin Luther King Jr., otherwise known as MLK, was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He started off as a pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He believed and followed Muhammad Gandhi's nonviolent methods for the civil rights movement. His start of the civil rights leadership came during the Montgomery bus boycott. This is where he also gained national attention and became one of the most famous civil rights leaders of all time. Some of the things that he would do was give speeches, he led the marches, he led boycotts, sit-ins, etc. He would be front and center and willing to be arrested right next to the rest of the protesters. His famous speech, and what he's probably the most known for, is the I Have a Dream speech. Martin Luther King Jr. was the co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC. This was an organization that used Black churches to organize nonviolent protest movements for equality. Violence towards the African Americans during the nonviolent protest led to media coverage and support of the civil rights movement. This was what made the civil rights movement successful. Most people in the United States weren't necessarily paying attention until it came on their news and they were seeing the horrific incidents that were happening to African Americans as they were peacefully gathering for equality. They ended up looking like the victims, while the whites who were the aggressors looked like a bunch of schoolyard bullies. King was arrested numerous times during these movements, spent multiple days in jail. His most famous time in jail was when he wrote the letter from Birmingham jail. There had been some criticism on the nonviolent movement and the fact that there were some who felt that protesting for equality kind of was going about it the wrong way. They believed in the approach of using the courts to make the decision and to gain equality. Martin Luther King Jr., in his letter from Birmingham jail, wrote and expressed his support on why it is that the civil rights movement needed to have more action, and that why it is the nonviolent protest was the means in which equality was going to happen for African Americans. One of his things that he stated was that without forceful action, true civil rights would not be achieved. One major event for Martin Luther King was, and the civil rights movement, was the March on Washington for Jobs and Equality. Again, more than 200,000 African Americans and whites marched on DC. The speeches were given all day, and Martin Luther King Jr. Stood up to give his speech. It was going to be a different speech than the I Have a Dream, but as he was up starting his speech, a person in the audience shouted out, "I have a dream," which was a speech that he had given previously in Michigan and in North Carolina. And so he started to switch his speech over to the I Have a Dream speech. The I Have a Dream speech was the most significant speech of the day. It was one that resonated with the American population. This was a speech that was not about African American aggression or revenge. It was about a time in society where we would not look at the color of a skin to determine the worth of a person. Some of the themes that Martin Luther King Jr. Pushed during his protesting was this idea of sticking together and unity. He did not believe that the civil rights movement was only an African American movement, but that it would need and that they needed to work with the whites as well. And again, that this was not a revenge against the whites, but it was a movement forward to gain equality and acceptance. He also talked about that threat and violence will not intimidate us. in all of their protest movements, whether it was the marches, whether it was sit-ins, boycotts, African Americans had extreme violence given to them. Lynchings were also beginning to pick up again during this time. Death threats, burning crosses, the Ku Klux Klan, all were happening quite regularly. And it was this message to the African American population, but also um, a message to the whites that we're not going to back down because you threaten us. We're willing to give everything that we have to gain equality. Just like the March on Washington, this idea of equality in jobs. African Americans were discriminated against in the workforce. Some jobs wouldn't even offer or allow African Americans to work for them. In jobs that African Americans were working, they were given less pay. Down in the South, there were limited jobs on what African Americans were even allowed to do. All of those stem from the Jim Crow era and the Black Codes and segregation laws. So that was a big thing that he was fighting, was that African Americans have the same economic opportunities as the white man. He also, going with his nonviolence ideology, was this love will conquer. It's not about hating the white man, it's about working together, accepting each other, loving each other, and through that love and acceptance is where we will find unity and equality. He also argued that nonviolence is the most powerful weapon of the movement. Malcolm X, on the other hand, was all about doing what was necessary to gain equality. He was a very big opponent of the nonviolent method. He felt that it was not working and that tiptoeing around the issue and being passive about it was not going to allow for equality. Malcolm X was born in Omaha, Nebraska. He moved to Lansing, Michigan. It was in Lansing, Michigan that his father was killed by a white supremacist. This is important to understand where it is that he kind of sets his basis. Having a father killed by an organization that of white men who are against African Americans does leave a scar. He was a young child at the time when his father passed away. He saw the problems that it caused in his home. By eighth grade, he had dropped out of school and was kind of on a rough path in life. So these were all events that definitely contribute to his attitude towards the whites. He did move to Harlem. It was in Harlem that he was arrested, and he goes to jail. And while he was in jail, he hears of the Nation of Islam and converts to the Nation of Islam. For those of you who don't know much about the Nation of Islam, they are a Muslim organization. They believed that African Americans needed to reconvert to Islam. That prior to coming over and being slaves, that Islam was the religion of the African American. And so it's this idea of kind of going back to the roots that uh, that African Americans had. He also wanted to create a black nation within the United States. He wasn't necessarily about ending segregation as much as creating a place where African Americans can have the opportunities separate from the white society. He would push for violence in the fight for civil rights movement if necessary. Usually, again, he did not believe that African Americans should sit there during a protest and allow whites to come up and beat them or spit on them or throw things at them without retaliating. So he was more about retaliation if necessary. The problem with his approach is that it caused fear amongst the whites. The one thing that Martin Luther King Jr. was trying to avoid. He understood that in order to get some change, that you needed to use the white man to pass legislation. Malcolm X didn't care. He felt that if African Americans fought, that that was how they would get their equal rights. Eventually, he does become suspended from the Nation of Islam after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He gave a speech in which he talks about how the chickens were coming home to roost, and that could be seen in the assassination of Kennedy. Basically, he was implying that what the white man reaped is now, I'm sorry, what the white man sowed, they are now reaping in the assassination of the political leader. In 1964, he took a pilgrimage to Mecca. This is a journey that that Islamic members go on, and it's a spiritual awakening journey. While he was there, he changed his view of the civil rights and his attitude towards whites in general, seeing that the Orthodox Muslims believed in equality of races. Some of the themes that Malcolm X stated throughout his civil rights movement prior to being assassinated was that African Americans are the only ones to be able to free themselves, that we can't rely on the white man to do it for us. It is through our actions and our abilities that we will become equal and free. He also argued that racism is what destroyed the United States, which would pretty well be the assumption of many African Americans at the time. He believed that equality by any means necessary. So if it's necessary to go out and fight in the middle of the street the to get the laws changed and to end segregation, then that is what African Americans should do. He wasn't necessarily totally militant, meaning that he didn't necessarily believe that they should go out guns blazing, but more that if it was absolutely necessary, that violence was a means to get what they wanted. Prior to his the pilgrimage to Mecca, he would preach that all whites are the devil. Like I said, he does change that after he comes back and realizes that kind of goes against the core of the Muslim belief. Okay, so today we are going to look a little bit closer at the two men and their civil rights and how it is that they went about getting equality.